Producer Sherilyn.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm Craig Schumann, and I get to introduce David, our speaker today. And oh gosh, in full disclosure, I work with him, and we've done some things together, in United Health and that whole land and so forth. So, and in other spaces as well. David is, I can always count on him as being somebody that really helps me understand some of the technology that I've left behind long ago, and why it matters, right? Why all my agilely, scrummy things, make some sense. And I think that's because, he and I both have kind of this passion of teaching, right? And he does it a little more professionally these days. I haven't done any adjunct professor stuff myself in a while, but he's, teaches over at George Mason. And David, you're in the capstone project, right? Teaching your design stuff.
Right.
So, that is always fun, and innovative and so forth. So, David's going to talk to us about, as he said, something a little more abstract, rather than a DevOps world. So, David, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Craig. Appreciate it. And I have a DevOps presentation too, if this goes horribly terrible. So I'll just. But thank you. I will say that Craig has showed me how much I don't know about Agile and a whole bunch of other things. And it's been a pleasure to work with him and get to know him. And thank you for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity. Some time ago, I had an idea, and this is where this presentation comes from. If you give me just a minute while I sort out my screen share here. So I lost the, there we go. Zoom and my Keynote don't play well together. Okay, let me get this going. All right, are we seeing a intro screen?
Yep.
Any challenges? Okay, great. All right. Well, just a couple of starter comments here. I will be asking a handful of questions during the presentation. You're welcome to yell it out. If you'd like to chat it out, that'd be fine too. I'll get the chat window open so I can keep an eye on it. As Craig mentioned, I work with him over at Turnberry Solutions. You guys probably know it as 3Bridge. A couple of weeks, months, half a year, something like that. We merged, and it's now a real thing, and we're going through that fun of merging two companies together. And so we're now Turnberry Solutions, and we're based out, most obviously we're gonna have a major presence in Minneapolis, but also now in Philadelphia. So one of the duties that I've had here is to think about how we train our technical people and how we manage knowledge and what knowledge work is, I guess. And so when we talk about, because one of the biggest challenges we have in the industry right now is finding technical people that aren't fresh out of college. Technology is just blowing up, and there's a lot of demand for it. And one of our jobs is to figure out how to match that demand. And so one of the tactics that we're using is to help young people learn, and then how do we manage the knowledge of folks who have been around for a while, like Craig and some other folks that we have, and how do we shepherd and mentor younger folks into becoming proficient and producing good work. So a lot of the things that I've been thinking of is how we manage knowledge, because that's essentially what we sell, right? I mean, we write code and we might build systems and that sort of thing, but effectively we're doing that with a foundation in knowledge. And so I've done a lot of thinking about knowledge, how to develop it among large staff, how to manage it in the learning process, how to employ it, beyond just say staffing. Like if we wanted to really scale out knowledge, what does it look like? And so, there's also that buzzword, knowledge worker. And I'm sure everybody on here on this call will consider yourselves a knowledge worker. I do. And so, knowledge is in the center of what we produce and what we do and what we deliver every day. And so the more we grow our knowledge, the more valuable we become as individuals. But there's another place where knowledge sits too. And that's kind of where this presentation originated, because knowledge can also exist in other places, as the little abstract of this talk mentioned. It can exist in a lot of different places. It's not hierarchical, and it's employed all the time, but we don't know it, or we do know it, and it's usually isolated to one person, and the whole process gets to, might become, processes get bottlenecked because, there might be one single person to answer a question, that sort of thing. So I started thinking about knowledge and about how it's used and how it exists within organizations, and this is where I've ended up. So I'm hoping to get some feedback from you guys, and so you guys let me know what you think about this. So let's start a little bit with some information about myself. As Craig mentioned, I live outside of Washington, D.C., where it's not snowing, and I'm a principal here at Turnberry Software and Cloud Architecture. I've got pretty much a 30-year, just about a 30-year career professionally. When I was leaving my undergrad's actually in photography, which is a science-based art form, if you think about it. So I got a technical degree in photography, and we used photography to do a lot of different things besides just say take pictures. We used it to measure things, like, for example, the speed of a bullet, which was a fun day class. But when you think about it, or photography is a technology that has an application. And then right about the end of the 80s and early 90s, there's a lot of things happening around technology, especially in the digital realm. And so I got really interested in how technology is used. And of course, it was nascent at the time. And now it's in everything we do. How do we use? So I'm interested in how we use and how we benefit from technology. I managed a internet boutique agency for a long time, a boutique internet agency for a long time, about 20 years. And I got to work in a lot of different industry verticals, and got experience in a lot of different businesses and work that they needed to do. And I built a lot of tools to help these businesses, both large and small, accomplish what they needed to accomplish. So they gave me a lot of experience. And so I ended up going back to school, and about 7 or 8 years ago, I got a master's in technology management, which is like a half brother to the MBA. So it's half MBA, half technology, kind of like CIO training, which I thought was really interesting because, again, it's applying technology to business problems. I'm also pursuing a second master's in technology studies, which is essentially how technology is affecting us at the societal level. And there's a little bit of that in here, something I'm kind of doing on the side, and I'm absolutely fascinated by it because it's really permeating just about everything we do. As Craig mentioned, I also am an adjunct professor because I don't have enough to do. I teach one class over in the information technology program, the capstone seniors, where they have to solve a real business problem with technology. It's a 2-semester course. So we're halfway through the semester, halfway through the course right now, and during our break, and they all have projects, and they have to implement those projects for their businesses next semester. That's when they manage their projects, and I get to use all the agile stuff that I learned from Craig. Of course, as you may guess, I am a knowledge worker as well. And so, so let's talk a little bit about what knowledge is. And so this is a basic question, and the genesis of this talk really came from this slide that comes from a talk that's a couple of people come in and give to my students every year. It's a talk on presentations and how to present, how to formulate a good presentation, how to act in front of a group of people. And he's got this slide in here, which always struck me as fascinating, where he talked about how data becomes information, and then how information can be transformed into knowledge. And of course, I got to thinking about the knowledge part, because we're using knowledge in our day-to-day, But we're also generating a whole bunch of data. And so if we're generating data all the time and we're using it and turning it into information, well, then there's got to be some piece of knowledge in there as well. So what's happening at the organizational level to take advantage of this phenomenon, right? So if we think about data and information, we have data analytics, we have data science, we have data engineering, we have big data, right? We hear a lot about that. And of course, on the information side, we have information technology, we have information systems, information security, as well as reports and dashboards, which is turning data into information for us. And of course, we also have data architecture. So those of you who work with databases and such might be familiar with, taking data and organizing it into something that's manageable at a database level. And of course, we have information architecture, which we find when we put together websites, right? So we have this already for data and information, quite prevalent. We have an entire industry dedicated to manage data and information. So, data's gotten a lot of attention lately. I wanted to share a little bit of this with you. This is some of the work I'm doing now in terms of how data is perceived. Data has value, right? Here's a headline from The Economist a few years ago: world's most valuable resources, no longer oil, but data. Okay, it has no production costs. So there's a gold rush to collect data. There's sites and there's applications that are out there, and all they do is collect data. Facebook is one of them. Okay. Of course, it's a business strategy. Selling ads is probably the core here. TV stations are about to track you and sell targeted ads, just like Google and Facebook. Of course, TV stations are late to the game, so they want to do this, right? So it is a hot area to be in. Of course, data is now becoming, say, a threat, or maybe it's being used to challenge some of our norms, let's say. Here's an ad. Here's an article from a couple months back. Facebook knew ads and micro-targeting could be exploited by politicians, and they accepted the risk. Why? Because they were making a ton of money, quite a bit of money. And of course, we communicate through these systems, and we're putting Facebook and other similar kind of systems in between our communication. So that gives them quite a bit of power to manipulate, and especially when we're talking about, our social, the social media landscape and landscape and that sort of thing. Finally, data as a surveillance tool, which is even more nefarious, right? Police departments adopting facial recognition tech amid allegations of wrongful arrests. Okay, there's a lot of concerns about this kind of thing right now. So what this tells us is that, well, we have to be very good at collecting data to make sure that we are able to believe in it, trust it, it's accurate, that sort of thing. And it's a maturing practice, as you can see. These businesses have gotten very good at turning data into information and making use of it, because that's their main business model. But we're seeing in all these organizations, just about every organization, that this is becoming important to do, let's say, on a local scale. And of course, from data and from information, we need to arrive at knowledge somehow. So these are the questions for this talk. Are we taking advantage of the systems that we have to generate the knowledge that we need? And of course, what would be a deliberate knowledge system? What would it look like, right? How are we collecting, generating, and using our knowledge? How are we storing our knowledge? How do we use it? How is it used just by an individual who has that knowledge? And those are the types of things we want to think about. For this talk and doing the research for this talk, I did a search for knowledge architecture on Google. I got to a Gartner site, and this is what it told me. The individual who oversees, this is the definition of a knowledge architect. It's a job title. The individual who oversees implementation of the enterprise's knowledge architecture, who leads the knowledge architecture team. And of course, this definition goes on to say the knowledge architect defines knowledge processes and identifies the technology requirements for creating, capturing, organizing, accessing, and using knowledge assets. So really not helpful at all. So I set off to find my own definition. So we started with data. I started looking at data as a as the definition. And I pulled out this highlighted blue area, facts and statistics collected together for reference or analysis. So let me ask you, out of this kind of sentence here, which word stands out, or which word or word stands out to you about data? I'll give you guys a couple. You can type in chat too. No takers? Collected together. Yeah. Mia Earhart wins. Data is collected together. I thought this was an interesting because the together part kind of sounds like it's not good by itself, like one individual datum, or maybe data, because it's a plural noun, requires more than one thing. But it's also could be a commentary on the fact that an individual piece of data or an individual datum is not very valuable, right? You can't really do anything with a single data point. So this I found to be interesting. When we look at information, I'll be asking the same question. Facts provided or learned about something or someone. Does anybody want to try to pull out the key word here? Philosophy. No, that's the last question.
Maybe it's MASH.
About. Hey, if you're not going to play nice, Craig.
Facts.
Facts.
Scott Bruce is our winner. It is learned.
Oh,
Right?
okay.
And learned implies a process, right? We take data and we learn from it. And that thing we learned is information. I also want to note the computing references here. In fact, there's a computing reference on the previous one that talked about just storage, right? Just if it's stored in a hard drive, it's data. But you notice data as processed, stored, or transmitted. I thought that was kind of interesting. And I also would say that information is kind of a nebulous term a little bit. I mean, it might mean different things to different people. What might be information to one person may not be informational to another. So I thought that was kind of an interesting way to think about data. So here's knowledge, facts, information, and skills acquired by a person through experience or education. What stands out to you for this one? Acquired. Yeah, well, that's one of them. There's one other in here. There's three of them. I'll give you, there's three words.
Skills.
Experience.
Through experience, correct. Acquired through experience. And I think this is the crux of what to think about when we start thinking about knowledge systems, right? It also, some also interesting here is the practical understanding of a subject, right? Practical implies that it needs to be useful in some manner. It needs to have some sort of benefit, okay? Somebody mentioned facts. I'll expand my window. Yes, Shelley, thank you. Each one of these definitions started off with facts. Did you guys notice that? And it seems to me that in order to gain knowledge through data and information, the data and the information needs to be trusted. It needs to be true in some fashion, right? Some say we live in a post-fact world. Well, I won't go into that, but certainly worth the PowerPoint, that's for sure. But I think it means that the systems that we create that generate knowledge, that generate data, generate information, need to be accurate and produce things that can be relied on. I mean, we make important decisions all the time, especially folks in organizations. They're getting information and they're making decisions based on the information. We need to be able to trust that information. Okay. So let's look at these together. We have data, which is collected together, information, which is learned, and knowledge, which is acquired through experience. And when I look at this, I kind of see a progression. We have, activities, or we have stages, right? So if we were to look at these as a process, we look at the first step, collected together, would be a collection process where we have to ensure that we're collecting the data. We're collecting the data that we need in a reliable and dependable manner. That means if we are going to use data, we have to establish something that works and that we can trust. Okay. Second one, for information, we're learning we can analyze information, right? And of course, we're processing data using algorithms that we should all believe in, that we understand. For example, in our business, we measure things. We do things like sales commissions, right? Which is of course important to the sales folks. And that math has to be accurate in order to decide, to know that not just to pay them, but also to understand what the cost is and all sorts of other businessy things. And then finally, we have to implement that knowledge in some fashion. Use it, see it in a chart or have it on a report or something like that. So this is the use of knowledge. And this is fairly easy to do when you think about it on an individual level. But what does it look like on an operational level? When we look at an organization and how they operate, how do we utilize knowledge through that process, right? And then most importantly, how do we grow and evolve that knowledge over time? Okay, so let's kind of mock something up here, right? So here's some sales. We're gonna fake some fake data with a fake chart. We're gonna talk about some analyzing sales, right? So at the top, we have some data, and at the bottom, we have that data plotted across time, showing us trends. And so that, to me, is information. That those trends tell us something. Those lines tell us something. Okay, and that's information, and we can glean things off this, right? So what does the graph tell us, right? I won't ask you guys to try to take a shot at this one, but so for example, the middle ones here, the red and blue ones here, they have started to slope downward after this particular quarter, right? So what does that mean, right? Why are they dropping? What events are causing that to drop? Why are they similar, right? Might be something we want to ask, right? For the yellow line, well, it was growing, but it spiked and now it's sloping off again with the other ones of our products. Could this be indicative that what happened at this time that caused it to spike? Okay, is the date relative, right? And why isn't it being sustained as much? And of course, this one along the bottom, well, it's been doing okay, but it's been steady. It's slowly growing. So you can see, like, by looking at this, we generate questions. We need to know things, right? Let me get past my bullets here. And so what do we need to answer these questions, right? We need more information, or we might argue that we need some knowledge, right? We need to get knowledge about these circumstances around this situation, okay? And so people who have looked at these charts all the time start to gain experience. They start to gain, understanding through that experience, through the years that they've looked at these types of things. And they might have past experiences that they can rely on that inform their decision making. But not everybody has that luxury, right? So here are some questions I hope to answer. How do we identify what knowledge we need? What must we do to recognize that we are generating or in need of knowledge, right? How do we know we need it? How do we store it? How do we use it? And it's not just something that sits in a database or on a SharePoint site or something like that. Of course, we have these things called knowledge bases, which are data and databases, but I would also say that those are evolved over time as they need to be, because things change over time. And of course, how do we refine it? Once the organization, once we recognize that we need knowledge, that we need to use knowledge in some way, how is it refined? How is it generated? How is it refined? And what are the deliberate efforts we need to make to refine them? So I want to try to answer these questions. To start off with, I see knowledge sitting at the intersection of process and decisions. And what I mean by that is that first we have a process, right? So we're going to talk a lot about processes. A process is a system we have we have built, that's supposed to be built, that to do work, right? And of course that will collect data and present it to us in some formalized manner. So all of our processes produce data. All of our data can then become information in terms of like how well we're doing at that process, right? Mm-hmm. But not always will that process satisfy the need. Like sometimes we deviate from that process, right? Of course, the decision is what we have to do when we have a deviation. The process doesn't account for the current situation, so somebody needs to come in and make that decision. Okay, so why is the decision being made, and who makes it, and of course, more importantly, what happens when it's made a whole bunch of times? If you have a process that isn't working, or we continue to deviate from it, circumstances are say changing, that sort of thing, we need to be able to pick that up and be able to refine our processes. And of course, if we're making these kind of decisions through our work, is there other information that we should collect while we're encountering these circumstances? Okay, so to reset, imagine a process, and sometimes it doesn't work. Some circumstance causes it, somebody who's supposed to go through the process, to stop and to talk to somebody else to solve that problem. That's the scenario I'm thinking of. So here's a process, and I may or may not have been hungry when I drew this out. But here is a process. I think everybody's seen this, right? And there's a decision in this process, right? But this is a decision that's expected, right? And it's usually a binary decision, or a relatively easy decision to make. In this case, I'm asking if I'm hungry. If I'm not, I'll do the dishes. If I am hungry, I'm going to make a sandwich. And of course, that sandwich, making that step has inputs. In this case, meats, breads, meats, cheese, toppings. And of course, it has an output, a tasty snack, right? So then I will proceed to eat the sandwich. I'm no longer hungry, and I will now do the dishes. So, this defines how people do their jobs, and, what information do they need for one of these steps, and, what are all the specific tasks within this process that we need to define. And I'm sure all of you have done some version of this in your careers, right? You guys are all agile professionals, right? These tasks eventually become our user stories, right? This is where we may define a preferred task, or current state versus future state type thing. We'll generate user stories. And so, we work at this level, and we're really good at it, right? I mean, and one of the things that tells us we're good at it is the way we get feedback from users. If you think about the software development process, you have, a document of the current situation, look for improvements, write tasks, or identify the tasks, write your user stories, just like you guys have done. The stories are then developed into functionality, right? And of course, users test and give us feedback, or what we also know as what we call the build, measure, learn cycle, the iterative cycle. Okay, and so we've gotten very good at this, and we're doing this all the time. We have almost, I think, perfected it in a lot of ways, if we can just get the clients to do what we tell them. So, but one of the questions I had is that this is where we kind of stop, right? We don't go further than this, because once the task is accomplished, once we've built this and the user is able to perform their task, then we kind of step away. And I'm wondering, is that because we weren't hired to do anymore, right? But even internally, when you're looking at your own organization, and we're looking at our organization quite a bit because we're in the midst of a merger, and so there's a lot of questions being asked about how we do our jobs. And so this is, top of mind for me. And so I'm thinking, well, if we're good at it, if we can do it this way at a smaller level, can we do it at a much larger level, right? So if we were to look at a process, okay, And if we say that process is made up of a whole bunch of little tasks, and those little tasks have inputs and outputs, right? Then we can look globally and watch that process, watch what deviates from it, and understand how often we have to stop and make a decision to get that process back on track, right? When we deviate from the process, we need to figure out what's causing it, what we have to do, and how we have to change, or how we make a decision to get the things moving along, right? So what do we need to make those decisions? And this is kind of where I settled on. If I am a manager and I'm I'm presented with a problem during what should have been a normal process, I need to understand things. I need to understand why we're in this situation. What are the circumstances around it? And again, this is a very abstract concept, but the idea here is that if I am presented, the first thing I'm going to ask is for information. So we need to make sure that we have the information we need when it comes time to make this decision. And of course, if I make decisions over and over and over and over again, 10 times, 100 times, whatever, well, of course, I'm experiencing that, right? And so the more times I have to do this, the more times the more knowledge I develop, right? So I'm just developing my own knowledge. And that comes, of course, with time and experience, right? Acquired through experience, as we noticed there earlier. So, but often we need information to solve that problem. And so if I'm able to collect information and present it to the person who has the problem, perhaps they can make that decision. And perhaps maybe we can become more efficient. So what do we do? How do we make this happen, right? How do we turn our knowledge into something that can be rolled into our production process or our just operational processes, right? So how do we become more efficient? We refine our processes to include the information we need. So we make sure that we can collect information and have that information ready. And I'll get to how we do that in a second. We also need to recognize that we're learning about the environment in which we work. And that's where our knowledge comes into play, right? We're learning the idiosyncrasies of our environment, how it's changing, for example. One of the reasons why Agile exists is to respond to business changes and market changes, right? Well, it works at a lower level. So the question is, how do we make it work at a higher level? So how do we know what to improve? Well, of course, we use the build, measure, learn process, tried and true, always works out well. But also, we want to track this decision-making. When we have to make the decision, we want to be able to track that and embed it somehow into our overall processes, our overall, say, data processes, a data acquisition process. And if we're able to embed that into our data process, we'll get better data that is data, let's say data and information that is then catered for our unique circumstance. So what is the production process for data? Now, we've been talking a lot about data pipelines at work. I'm not a data person, but I've learned quite a bit about these recently. And data pipelines are the production process for our information. Just like we have the Agile process, that is the production process for our software, right? And we have our internal processes, which are the production process of our value, our business value, what we deliver to our customers, right? So in a data pipeline, these are very abstract, very kind of top level data. We start with some source of data, whether it be an internal database or an external database or something like that. We do the old ETL on it, and that goes into, say, some warehouse. This warehouse is essentially a cleaned version of our data in a usable fashion, right? So this warehouse represents data. Our operational, then we can turn that into both an operational and an analytical, say, databases. And this is where we get our information, right? From our operational database, we spin out workflows. And from our analytical database, we spin out visualizations. Okay, when I talk about operational support workflows. And so so if we think about this, these last two, these operational analyticals, give us insight and opportunities for refinement. So if we are presented with a situation where we have to make a decision and we don't have the data, or we could use some different data, well, then we want to make sure that we make those refinements to this pipeline and roll those changes back into the system, either back into the warehouse or back into the source, so that we're constantly improving. Kind of looks like a cycle, right? Almost like a build, measure, learn cycle. But what we're doing is we're adding into these, within these, encapsulated within these arrows, and maybe these blue arrows, is, code, is algorithms that turn data into usable formats that give us information. But the act of the algorithm doing its job is effectively embedded knowledge, right? That algorithm is doing work and producing information, but the work that it does comes from our understanding of what we need out of the data. So that's one place where knowledge can sit, in an algorithm. So if you experience a deviation, you should think about, well, how do we improve the data so that we can make our processes better and handle more, okay? So if we want to, how do we harness long-term data and information refinement, right? The first thing we do as we repeatedly experience processes, right? We analyze the effectiveness of the inputs and outputs. Are we getting in and exporting out what we need in all of our steps, for example, all of our processes, right? We need to refine our decision process, become either better at it or create more rules on it, or maybe perhaps embed it in some algorithm, if that's possible. And of course, we want to improve the process, our actual process, through evolution, that making a sandwich process. We want to make that through, we want to improve that over time. And of course, we employ data and information all the time. So as we do this, we can validate whether that information we're using is good and able to be relied upon. We want to improve the process that generates it. This is the data pipeline process. And we want to look historically over the evolution of those decisions. So as we mature and as we get more, just better at our jobs, is it possible for us to then become better at the, to roll in the tools to become better at our overall, information system, right? And so then the larger question is, well, where does the knowledge go? Where does it end up being stored, and can it be rolled into the process somewhere, right? So if we come back to this guy and we think about our process and our decision making, and we employ that step of evolution, and we are conscious of that we need to continually improve our processes and look for ways to make them run smoother, to make sure that the people who are involved in those processes can do their jobs efficiently. It's not just about improving the steps or the tasks or the within the process, but also the information that's being produced from it and consumed by it, right? And that involves us including this information, this data pipeline within the overall management and evolution process, right? And so what I wanted to do, I imagine there's some coders on this call, people who have written code. When I write code, 6 months later, well, let me rephrase that. 6 minutes later, I've forgotten about it, right? Because when you write code, it is effectively a process. Code is essentially a bunch of instructions that moves data from one place to another. And so when you write it, it's not going to change. And so you can forget about it. And so you kind of abstract it out. You're like, okay, well, this code does X, and it will always do X as long as it gets the right data, right? So I started to think, well, why can't we think about our processes like that, our organizational processes, where we can then take our process, embed it with the knowledge in terms of not just like people having that knowledge, but then rolling the understanding that we glean from that knowledge back into the process and improve it on a larger scale. And that way we are preserving in a similar way the same thing we do with code. We're preserving our understanding of what needs to happen and how the work is supposed to be done. And then we can pretty much not forget about it, but it should operate in a much better way. All right, so just finishing up here, knowledge collection and use. Here's, did I push the wrong button? Yeah. So here's my 3 questions that were on the screen earlier. How do we identify what we need, right? We do that through experience, through deliberate attention to the need to use knowledge, to learn, and then to embed and make improvements based on that learning. How do we store knowledge, right? Knowledge is stored with us, of course, through experience, but also within our processes and systems. There's a lot of things that we do that we may not understand why we do, but we're doing it because somebody had the knowledge to design the process that way. And of course, how do we refine it over time? Through the build, measure, learn process, but also through a deliberate attention to not just what's happening now, but the historical events and what changes came from that. So some concluding thoughts. I tell you, this will be kind of short. If we produce data, information, we should also be producing knowledge. Okay. And of course, we're doing it all the time. We just aren't conscious of it, or not all of us aren't maybe conscious of it. Knowledge collection and utilization must be a deliberate process. We should do it intentionally, and it requires experience. So if we are experiencing, we're running through a process, we learn, right? And we gain knowledge from that experience. So as we continue to repeat processes, we should be involving those processes. As such, we need to analyze, review, and refine, and also we should act upon the knowledge that we glean. So like I said, this is happening all the time. It's happening in the background, right? And we need to be prepared to start capturing these things in ways that we may not have in the past. If a question is not answerable right away, then I think that's okay, because I think over time, if you know that you have the question, over time, the answer will arrive. Maybe it's through a few more iterations of a process or iterations of a task. And if you are focused on the act of acquisition of that knowledge and look for opportunities to improve your processes, then you're going to accelerate the rate at which your organization matures and the way that you can deliver more consistent value to your customers. So, knowledge is intangible. It's not something you can hold in your hand. You can't say, I guess you could save it on a database in a knowledge base, but it's something that also exists in a lot of places. And I think it's important to understand that as we are generating data and using information and learning from that information, that we can then roll that knowledge into processes, procedures, and decisions that we make every day. And I think that it's important to recognize that, because especially within our organizations, we can always improve. Technology is a very vast and capable tool, but it can't do everything by itself. It needs us to help it along and to craft it in ways that are custom to our own specific needs. So that's all I got. Appreciate you guys listening. Thank you. I'll take questions now.
Super cool.
Or criticisms, whatever.
Well, I liked your sandwich analogy.
Oh, so did I.
I was wondering if there's any way you could take it further, like to explain some of the things you were talking about in terms of the sandwich making. Like, could you give an example of when there's something, that something goes wrong with the process, or, and how you take things that you've learned and feed that back in to the system?
Well, I guess the easiest way to say it is that, I don't like turkey, I like ham. Therefore, that sort of thing. I'll never make a turkey sandwich. That's one way to do it. Or, for example, there may be say certain types of breads that work better than others. You know, maybe rolls are better for turkey, and wheat bread is better for. Look, I'm making this stuff up, so I appreciate your question for sure. But my point is that there's a whole bunch of ways to make a sandwich, right? I mean, there's all kinds of different sandwiches out there. Some of them are grilled, right? Some of them are hot sandwiches, like Philly steaks, Philly cheesesteak, for example. It's a hot sandwich. That's a lot of work, as opposed to, say, simple ham and cheese is just something you can throw together. And so, so I guess when you're talking about me going through that process versus you going through that process, well, I have different tastes, I have different preferences. My process of making a sandwich is going to look a lot different than yours, right? And so what you like. I know what I like, right? And so no two processes will look the same. Now, if we're talking about something that's a little bit more larger, in terms of one client versus another, for example, perhaps you might take a different process for one client, or a different process for, say, like in my world, a web job versus a data job, maybe custom programming versus data analytics. There might be, we might use different technologies when we move from language to language, right? We use one thing if we use JavaScript, we use another process for, say, Python, or that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I'm actually answering your question, but my point being is that if you have the opportunity to try turkey and you don't like it, that's an output, right? And then that knowledge that you don't like turkey goes back into the data system, in this case, whoever buys the groceries in my house, to not buy turkey. I'm not sure if that works, but it sure was fun to describe.
One concern I've always had about data is the ability to manage metrics sometimes. So just as an example, I had one company I was at had a service level agreement based on their, response, recovery, resolution time for incidents. And so the process that one team took was they picked up a ticket, a service desk ticket or whatever. They marked it as recovered the second they picked it up, before they did anything, so that they would make sure that they met their service level agreement for recovery time.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, then that would be, see, what I would do in that situation is add a step for approval, right? If you wanted more accurate data, then that's a process that's not producing accurate data. So then I would add a step and somebody would approve it. In fact, we have a very similar situation in our company right now, very similar, where we're adding an approval process to, it's benign, it's nothing significant, but it's just a piece of data we need to be accurate. In this case, what somebody's doing at their job, because we do a lot of staffing, right? So we want to know, especially on the tech side, we want to know what they're doing. Are they doing Python work? Are they doing front-end JavaScript work? What are they doing, right? So that information is very important to us, because we want to manage their growth and their skills over the long term. So I need to make sure that data is accurate when I know if somebody's interested in, say, let's say, for example, front-end JavaScript. Well, we're using a new framework called Vue, and I want to know everybody who might be interested in it, so I can reach out to them and say, hey, we're doing a Vue class or something like that, right?
Yep.
So that's just but the thing is, when we place somebody, well, that piece of information needs to be accurate. So then we might plug in an approval to make sure that the person who cares about that being accurate, like myself, can just kind of see it before we finish it up, right? Before we finish the placement operation, so, and really most of our placements all working in data. It's really just collecting and saving data in a bunch of places. But in this case, yeah, it's if we add a step to ensure that it's accurate, then I think we can, get good data out of it. And so that kind of applies to your situation. Don't cheat. I mean, look, if those guys aren't finished or aren't delivering quickly enough, then look at what's slowing them down, right? I mean, troubleshooting requires a lot of research and a lot of investigation. Are there ways to speed that process up, right?
Yep.
I spent the last 30 years chasing down bugs in other people's code. I've got a process because it's not my favorite thing, but I do it a lot. So I've improved my process so I can do it fast. But that's just that's just an example. There's a question in the chat we can maybe address. Michael Kaufman said, if someone acquires knowledge through experience, but based on dubious facts, is it still knowledge? That's a tough question. Yes, doesn't mean he's right. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it just takes me back to the whole alternative facts. Like everybody has a different perspective, but sometimes it's just not true. But how do you define truth? I'm
sorry, go ahead. Please.
No, it's just like, like AI, AI could do all sorts of things for us, but if it's not based on something factual and real, then what good is it? Is it good knowledge if it's based on a bunch of garbage? I don't know.
Let me show you guys a screenshot. Let me close these guys. I'm going to show you a screenshot of a book that is representative of some of the things that it's going to take me a second to produce it, of some of the things that I've been studying on the cultural side. And it is telling when you see it. Hopefully I can do this quickly. But when you talk about like, misleading data, I mean, look, you can make data, you can spin data however you want, right? Here you go. So this is a book cover. And this used to be the autocomplete from Google. And if you guys and you can see what's going on here, right? So if I were to make now this is about 10 years old. So Google has since fixed this. But if you think about how this might have happened, you have data that's been collected by people searching in Google. And so Google keeps like a histogram of the phrases or something, and then we'll put in the thing that's most popular or most frequent. Totally, let's call it totally clueless of what the word means. It's just data. There's no context. So then you end up with this because we have, certain sentiments in our population that is being exposed in this system that had no intention of being a racist system, for example, right? But if you guys are interested in this a little bit more, there's a couple of really good Netflix documentaries right now. One's called Coded Bias, and the other one is called The Social Dilemma. They're both very good. And they talk about like how, I wouldn't say it's getting out of control. In fact, my work is actually addressing this because I'm a technology person, the solution to solve this problem needs to be put into the algorithm. And then I end up thinking, well, that's not the solution. Clean data is the solution. So this happens all over the place. There's examples with Uber. There's examples with, recidivism rates and sentence guidelines. If you guys want to read about New Jersey, they put in a sentence recommendation system in their courts to sentence people, based on past history of offenses. They recommend sentences, that sort of thing. And that's real stuff, right? That's not just, not nice autocompletes. That's actually people's lives.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they've totally cleared it up. I just typed in why are Black people, and then it's like fast and stuff like that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a bit scary to do, I believe. But the coded bias I thought was really good. The author of this book is actually featured in that one. Her name is Sarah Noble. But anyway, this is it's a whole different area to look at from technology standpoint. So, but I'm trying to look at it from an organizational standpoint. So it's a little bit smaller of a universe, right? Because Google's trying to capture everything. Uber is massive. These systems, some of these other systems that are, especially in the policing and the crime space, they're operating at this massive scale. When you look at an individual organization, where you have a little bit more control over it, especially if you are the one who is in control of generating the data, and also the same, maybe not one person, but if you are involved in generating the data, testing it to see if it works, and then testing it within process to be able to see if it's working, and it just gets back to the question we had about truthfulness. Well, you can make that determination at a smaller scale, I think, and then you kind of stay away from these sort of, say, inherent problems you might get because something is wrong or that kind of thing. But when we get to things like financials and, like I mentioned earlier, commissions for salespeople, well, that's got to be accurate, and there's ways you can test that. And so at a smaller scale, I think we have a lot of capability.
I think, go ahead.
No, I just said cool. I mean, it just like my brain is like whirring around here right now. So go for it, Sharon.
I guess I'm hung up on the idea of, how we need to get information and do things and then see patterns and then say, okay, I've learned something from this. And I don't want to just say, "Ooh, now I know something." I want to be able to put it back into the system and change things in the future so that they can be better. And when you're talking about software, like if you're talking about a program, that can be relatively easy to do, because you could say, "Oh, I know in the future that I need to check to see, what kind of bread that I'm using, and so I have to ask, am I using whole wheat? If yes, don't use mayonnaise, because I've learned that goes really bad together. It's terrible, so then that's easy and I don't have to remember. And every time I make a sandwich, I will avoid that problem. But I know myself, like just recently, I kind of realized that I'm sure everyone has experienced this, where you learn something in life, something really simple. Like I recently realized that if I listen to soft music while I'm trying to do things that are unpleasant, I'm more able to focus and get the thing done. Mm-hmm. But then I forget. And a year later, I remember it again. But that's not a really good thing to do. Saying that, every time I do something unpleasant, or every time I do anything at all, I can't say to myself, is this pleasant or unpleasant? If unpleasant, is it possible for me to listen to music? Yes or no? I can't. Yeah. So there has to be some kind of a different system that works.
Yeah.
But like, how do you do that? And then what you're talking about, when you're talking about people having to remember certain things they're learning and really apply it, but also when you're talking about a business where that takes time, and time is money. And a lot of people might say, you know what? Why are you asking yourself these questions? And why are you spending all this time reflecting on stuff that may or may not, be useful in this instance? Just forget about it. We've done it before. We've gotten good. Just do it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you bring up a good point, because, a lot of it hinges on the type of process we're talking about. Like, is there somebody who's following a series of steps, right? That's one thing. But I think it's more of when you're working with multiple people within a process, right? And then the process becomes a little bit more abstracted. We're working with something called a business BPM, business process manager. There are these little workflow managers. You guys, I see some the other head shaking, two heads shaking. I admire your secret lab chair, by the way. But when you're looking at like automation, then you can roll that kind of stuff in there, right? And so you can say, so let's say, for example, if I go back to our placement stuff, and say, well, this person is being placed in a position that is data, so it's going to be approved by the person in the data practice. If this person is being placed as a programmer, then it's going to get approved by somebody in the programming practice. So the computer can make those decisions for us. So those types of process decision making can be, a lot of them can be done at the code level. What I'm talking about is if something happens and, well, the process breaks down, right? And then somebody has to come and get it back on track. And then it's like, well, then why did it break down, right? What caused it to deviate? And I think that's where your knowledge comes into play. I mean, as senior people, as we become better at our jobs and we grow through our careers and we've now got 20 or 30 years experience, well, we're loaded with knowledge and people come to us and answer a lot of questions, which is perfectly fine. But if there's opportunities to teach them to, say, become more efficient or improve the process that they're using to become more efficient, then I think that's a form of embedding knowledge into some sort of process, right? I don't want to bring up some of this. I don't want too much of the school stuff. It's very much like, what Karl Marx is saying about embedding labor in a machine, right? So you end up with a machine that does the work for you and it can repeat it faster and faster, right? I mean, we see that now. We see robots doing stuff. We see AI doing stuff. 6-8 years ago, I read about a story from Japan about a insurance company that was getting rid of their underwriters because they didn't need them anymore. They used statistical analysis to determine risk, and then they would price their insurance premiums based on risk. Mm-hmm. So that's an improved decision process, right? And so if and then you use your experience from that. You're like, okay, well, now we have a person with a certain risk score, and then we can adjust our algorithm based on the performance of that person or how many claims they might file. Well, then we scored them too low, that sort of thing. Like if they file more claims, well, we got to adjust the algorithm. It's that sort of thing. Because that's what's happening. You're turning your knowledge into an algorithm in a way, right? How do you measure risk? Not to be all gloom and doom, but robots will take over, and I hope to write poetry.
Well, and I think it comes down to one of those things too, of when you look at knowledge and you look at what you're getting at with knowledge, you only store the stuff that is relevant to that situation, really. I mean, if you're looking at this from a people perspective rather than a data perspective, you're really only going to store that knowledge and turn that knowledge into experience when it's relevant to the situation. So maybe you playing soft music in the background isn't really relevant to that situation, and until you experience it multiple times and run into that knowledge piece over and over again, it then becomes more of a habit and that true experience that then becomes innate and ingrained.
Yeah, that's a good point. And of course, you have to figure out what unpleasant means, right? And what soft means, soft music. But again, that's I think the point I wanted to make here really was quasi process, quasi technical, right? Because we are starting to work with more and more data. That's why I brought the screen back up. We're working with more and more data, and the more we work with it, the more we have to get good at managing it, right? And so these pipelines, this concept here has emerged from people doing it manually forever, and now it's turning into a production pipeline or production workflow or whatever. And then we're looking at it, well, how can I plug in a means to improve it, right? Because this part is simple. We just want to bring it into our warehouse in a way that we can use it, because these sources here for us are like Salesforce and like Dynamics and a few other tools that we use. So we want to get it all in one place and look at it all together. But then it's like, well, how do I improve it over time? How do I algorithmically improve it over time? And so that's kind of where this comes from. Well, then I'm thinking, well, what triggers the improvement? Right? What makes me need to improve this? How do I know something's wrong, or how do I know something can be improved? And who's in charge of that? Who's watching that? Like, is there a process improvement person, looking at our processes and saying, did that work for you? Right? Or let's say the finance guy wants to say, hey, I saw an error, or I think I can, I'd like to have this new, this new formula applied, or something like that, because I could use this data, or, even like when we get into something a little bit more abstract, like, one of the conversations we were having is, if there's all this, say, technical work out there, should we be chasing for all of it? Should we just chase like some of it? And if we chase some of it, what jobs should we chase? Which are the high value jobs? Which ones we know we can be successful at? That sort of thing. Is there a way to kind of improve that process? That's a little bit harder to define. Over time, perhaps we'll have to do that, because more and more people need technology. And hopefully, or, by some miracle, all these college grads who, can tinker with Java can actually produce some significant code, but I'm not sure that's going to happen right away. So, but again, I think it's probably more a commentary on the importance of technology and data to an organization. And it doesn't matter the organization, right? It could be anything. I've talked to different companies all the time, companies that are not even close to the tech space, that have just massive needs for data. A good example is a company we talked to a while back that was, when you go to Starbucks in the morning and you get that little croissant, egg and cheese thing, not to talk more about sandwiches, but, well, that thing's cooked in an oven. And this company repairs those ovens, right? Not just for Starbucks, but like for a lot of companies in the United States. I think they're a global company, actually. But they want to use data to inform their customers of which one to buy, which one is more reliable, when will it break? Can I be preemptive about fixing your oven so you're not down with it? So you don't have to have two of them on your counter, which is what Starbucks has, two of them, because if one goes down, they those little sandwiches, right? So that's a use of data to expand their value to their customers. That's significant. I thought it was a brilliant idea. And my response to them was, you need a system to manage your data. You need this. You need a pipeline of some sort to be able to produce that, organize it, get it produced so you can use it. Because we're collecting so much data. There's so much. It's ridiculous. And just one more comment on this. A lot of people have gotten really good at Excel, right? Like really, really good at Excel, because really that's the only tool out there that can produce the kind of data that I think a lot of people need. So you end up with these spreadsheets, all that kind of stuff can be done in a system like this. Get it out of their hands. So. I'm rambling a bit because I'm hungry.
That's
Are you
great.
gonna make a sandwich?
Yeah, I think so. Not turkey though. Actually, that's not true. I should like turkey.
Okay, well, I'm going to stop the recording unless we have something else.
Yeah, I just want to say I really appreciate you guys listening to this and asking your questions. I think it's a good discussion. I'm certainly happy to continue it in some form. My email should be around. Happy to engage with any of you guys if you have any ideas.
Great.
I would love to see a presentation on the steps between collection and analysis, dig a little bit more into strategies for that, because I have a lot of data and turning it into something, I get data from a lot of sources, and it's just some good strategies or I don't know, ways to better vet data and analyze it. That would be the next step. To build on this presentation would be exciting.
Yeah. Well, I certainly can either facilitate, present, or facilitate something like that. I've let Craig know, of course. My sister wants to talk to me now. She must not know I'm busy. But I will say this, that we're doing a lot of stuff in the cloud now. And in fact, we were working with a client that is pretty data heavy too. And they were just storing everything as flat CSV files in S3, but then turning around and pulling them out, processing them and pulling them out using a tool called Snowflake. And also, and then building systems on top of Snowflake like Tableau or other things like that. But the key is all about automation, right? If you can start automating it, it becomes like a stream almost, where you have just flows of data. In fact, a lot of the new AWS tools, Amazon tools that have come out recently have all been about processing massive amount of data in real time, because batch processing just has become inefficient. We've just got so much data that batching takes a day. So if batching takes a day, you might as well do it real time, right? And so automation is your key, is the first step, getting it into some form in an automated fashion. Then you tweak the automation to make it better. So, hope that helps.
We're definitely going that route. It's more just that I'm looking at things. I used to be in software development, and now I'm kind of in a more marketing role where I'm gathering a lot of data from different sources, and it's too much sometimes, and not all of it's actionable, and it's just a quality control issue. It's like trying to sift meaning from it, and even if I can understand the value of it and I act on it, what's the ROI? It's just like, it's just so much data all the time. I guess maybe I'm sounding a little frantic, but so much data.
I will say that marketing is probably the area that needs the most, skills in this space, because, I tell my students not to do marketing because it just involves too much. But I will say that it's all about trial and error, right? So one of the early, you may already know this, but one of the earlier systems of advertising on the web was, Google Analytics and some of the Google AdWords. But even before Google had purchased this product, I was using it to test things. And we were buying AdWords, keywords and stuff. And this is early on, one of my clients. And the cause and effect was so rapid that we were able to make changes very quickly. Now, fast forward 15 years, there's a great book called, it's a short read. His name's Tim Huang. I can get this information to you guys. But he's got a great book that talks about how these marketing systems are automated and how they will change ad purchases on the fly based on performance. So if people aren't clicking on something within a matter of hours, it's down. It's not there anymore. And so, in a marketing situation, you've spent money, and you need to make sure you're getting your ROI on that. So you need rapid response with your data. I imagine you probably already know this. But the thing is, if you can start automating it, then to get back into the knowledge discussion here, this is a great example, because now you're like, okay, well, what moves the needle? Does this content in this ad move the needle? Or does this method of contacting my customers work versus this other method? Does an email blast work versus a banner ad? That sort of thing.
We can get so granular. There's so much, and you can get so granular, but at what point is it just, there's diminishing returns? You just get a lot of requests.
My advice to you is don't get distracted by the granularity. I kind of feel like if I can throw a commentary, I kind of feel like the granularity is a bit of a sales gimmick.
It is. It totally is. It's been very successful to convince my leadership to buy a lot of tools.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that Google sells it, and that's this Tim Huang book is called subprime advertising crisis or something like that. His whole premise is comparing it to the subprime market from '08. But he was basically talking about, he's making the argument that more targeted ads on the internet don't work. But Google and Facebook and all these other massive companies are propped up by the myth that it does. And so if, at one point you're paying more to target, men in Manassas, Virginia for sandwiches, and I don't buy your sandwich, well, you're going to be like, well, why did I pay more for that ad? Right? Maybe I should have just targeted, men.
Well, if I start operating in a very sandwich centric.
Yes, because why stop now? We're almost done.
Oh. That's great.
But yeah, I think, again, what you do end up doing is you pull a lever. If you have a system like that and you have a relatively rapid response, then it's about experimentation. And then your experimentation produces the knowledge. And then what happens is, if I pull this lever, sales go up. If I push this button, sales go down. So what you're doing is you're learning what works for your market and for your, for your audience. And then you can start embedding that into, an operational process when it comes time to, make a purchase. Then you're already close, you're hitting the 90% efficiency mark because you know that this lever works and this button doesn't, that sort of thing.
And things are repeatable.
Yes. Well, yes. But I did a lot of work with the tabloids, just a quick aside, where he tested covers. Long time ago, I used to post the National Enquirer's website for those of you who remember that. But he would test his covers because he wanted to know what people would pick up on their way out of the supermarket. And so through his testing, he learned that this magazine, the people who bought this magazine responded to this on the cover, and the people who bought that magazine responded to that on the cover. But what ended up happening is that all of the tabloids all started to look identical. And I walked into his office one day, or his conference room one day, and he had on his wall all of the tabloids. These are like Star, Us, Weekly, all those guys, Life and Style. He had 6 or 7 of them, and he had like the last 13 or 15 weeks of every single competitor's cover all laid out on the wall, and they all looked identical. And there was no differentiation between the product. And that, of course, is the opposite of what you want, right? That's when you say, okay, well, we're all earning the same money. How do we become different? How do we capture more market by becoming different? That's where your marketers come into play. So it was an interesting phenomena for me, because it's like he was testing it to see if it worked, but then he ended up being the same as everybody else.
Well, if it had Bat Boy on it, I'm buying it.
Bad Boy, yeah, we did that one too. I did Weekly World News as well. I did all the AMI ones. I still do a little bit of work for them, but yeah, back in the early 2000s, it was a fun time for us, for sure. I don't know if fun is the right word, but it was fun. Some of those late nights were not so fun. So, but again, I appreciate everybody's time. Thanks for listening and your questions. And feel free to reach out to me if you ever have any other questions, or would you like to discuss it more. And I'll see if I'll email you guys some of the books I mentioned here, and the 2 Netflix documentaries that I think you guys might find interesting.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, real
Thank you.
pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yes,
Good
thank
stuff.
you. Have a good evening.